Guys, my name is Ankush Kaurav and I welcome you to Contour series. So far in the REST series of tutorials, I talked about how to develop GET, PUT and POST kind of REST APIs. Now in this tutorial, let's try to understand how to build those kind of REST APIs which would demand delete kind of a request to be made on them. So let's start. Guys, in general, we go for developing such kind of REST APIs, in those kind of scenarios where we want user to make a request to the application to request it to delete a certain resource which is present there. Now, what does deleting a resource means? Let's try to understand this overall concept of deleting a resource using a very simple requirement in this demo application. So here my requirement is very simple, guys. All I want is user to make a request to this application to delete a specific student's record. That's all about it. So what task I would perform here to fulfill this requirement? Well, I'm going to simply provide the users this REST API. So when a user is going to make a delete request on this REST API, by specifying the name of the student within the REST API itself at the end, whose record user want to basically delete from the application. When that request is going to reach this application is simply going to delete that student's record. If it's successfully able to delete it, then it's going to return true, and if it's not able to delete it successfully, it's going to return false in the response body to the client. Now question is, what code I got to write in this controller class so as to fulfill this requirement, so as to build this specific REST API? Guys, for GET, PUT and the POST kind of REST APIs which we developed in the earlier tutorial, whenever we were developing a new REST API, we were basically including a new REST API controller method, in the controller class. So here also we're not going to do something, extra. This is what is required. For building this REST API, all I need to do is to include a new REST API controller method in this Java class, and I'll be done. So let's do one thing. Let me include the required REST API controller method for this REST API, and later I will explain all related concepts to you in detail. So here I'm done with including the required REST API controller method for the REST API which we wanted to develop in this tutorial. Now let's understand this step by step. Guys, now when a user is going to make a delete request on this REST API, and when that request is going to reach this application, this REST API controller method is going to be called. Why? Because of this pattern and this argument request method dot delete. So once this controller method is called, this path variable annotation is simply going to extract the name of the student from the REST API which client has used to make the request, and is going to assign the same to this student name. And after that, this method is just trying to delete this student's record from the database. So if it's successfully able to delete it, then it's going to return true. Otherwise, it's going to return false to the client. Now here, I haven't written the exact logic, all those if-else kind of clauses, just to keep this tutorial a bit simpler. But in your actual project, you are supposed to be writing, the logic based on your project's requirement. All right. So after including this REST API controller method, now if I go to the Postman and let's say I want to delete the student's record, whose name is The Rock. So in that case, what I would do, I would specify the name of the student at the end of this REST API. That's what is this URL pattern. And then I would make a delete request on this. So I would choose delete. Now I'm not supposed to be sending any information along with it. And when I'm not sending any information, I'm not required to even, send any headers along with the request. So I would delete this off. Now, if you want the response of this, in the XML format, then you may specify this header except, because when you specify except value as application/XML, in that case, whatever response this application is going to generate, that has to be XML. So if it can generate in XML, it's only then this is going to send the response, is going to process the request. Otherwise, it's simply going to, tell to the client that it cannot process the request because its response cannot be generated by it in XML format, because this application can generate in XML format. So if we specify here accepts value as application/XML, so it's going to work properly. Now after this, if I make a delete request on this REST API, what's gonna happen? Well, I expect true in the response body and status code as 200 OK. Let's see if this happens or not. Cool. So here I've got true as response body and status as 200 OK. And I have here got this response body in XML format. Why? Because of this accepts value application/XML. Now if I delete this and then I make a request, then it's up to the application to decide in what format it has to send the response. Now this application supports XML as well as JSON formats, so it will decide on its own in what format it has to prepare and send the response. Now it's not a compulsion for this application to prepare the response in XML and send the same to the client. So now if I make a request, here I've got the response in XML format. Now here I've got XML not because it was mandatory for this application to send the response in XML. It's just that out of JSON and XML, it chose XML by default. That's all about it. But if we would have written here accepts value as application/XML, in that case application would have to send the response in XML only. And if it's not capable of sending in XML, then it wouldn't have processed the request itself. It would have raised some kind of exception or error. All right. Now, one more important concept you have to understand here. Here we gave user kind of a flexibility to request, for deleting a specific student's record. So this REST API is going to help user to achieve the same. Now, what if we want to give user, a kind of flexibility to make a request to delete all student records from this application? So how we would do that? Well, that's also very easy, guys. All we need to do is to create a new REST API controller method, and here we will write delete all students. Let's change the comments, deleting all student records. And here now we don't want user to specify a specific student's name at the end of the REST API. We want it to make a request to delete all students records. So this REST API is going to help with such a requirement. Now we don't need this path variable because user is not specifying any student's name within the REST API. So this I'm going to delete off from here. And here let's change the comment, delete all student records from the database. Now same thing, if it's successfully able to delete all records, it's going to return true and status code as a 200 OK, otherwise false with an appropriate status code. Now here again I haven't written the complete logic, all those if else kind of clauses. In your actual project, you are supposed to be writing, all that real logic based on your specific project's requirement. So now if I make a request, by making use of this pattern and delete request, yeah, it's already delete. what I expect it to return me true with status code as 200. Okay, let's see if that happens or not. Cool, so here I've got that. Body as true, status code as 200. Okay, it means application successfully deleted all student records from its database. So in this application, I tried explaining you how to design and develop those kind of REST APIs which would demand delete kind of a request to be made on them. So we tried understanding how to delete a specific student's record. We built the REST API for the same, and then we built another REST API to give user kind of flexibility to be able to request for deleting all student records from the database. In the next tutorial, I would talk about how to use Spring client to access these REST APIs what we have developed so far. So far, we have been using Postman tool to test these REST APIs, to access these REST APIs. From the next tutorial onwards, we would learn how to use Spring framework itself to write Java code to test, and access these REST APIs. Guys, a big thank you for learning REST API concepts using Spring MVC framework with me. If you have any feedback or any constructive comment, do post me a comment below the video or simply write to me on this email ID for all of your queries. Please like this video, share this video if this video has proved useful to you, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Gone to Series to get regular updates on what all tutorials we upload to our channel. And I'm gonna catch you in the next part of this tutorial.